Detroit, Oakland, and Arizona. Let's start in Oakland. A lot of buzz regarding the Raiders job right now.
Right.
John Gruden linked to going back to Oakland. What are you hearing right now?
Well, there were going to be staff changes no matter what. There were issues within that staff. I think the offensive coordinator, Todd Downing, was likely gone. Mike Tice, the offensive line coach, might have been in trouble. And so I think there was going to be turnover there based on the year they had, based on the year Derek Carr had. They were certainly going to make changes. I don't think this change comes at the top of the food chain with a coach they just gave an extension through 2022 unless they had an agreement in place. Now, they can't say it, but I think that there's a basic agreement there that John Gruden will be the next coach of the Oakland Raiders, and understanding there. And that's one of the reasons why Tampa didn't move on Dirk Cutter. I think you had two teams that were, not fully satisfied with their head coaches, but okay with their head coaches, and Tampa with Cutter and Oakland with Del Rio. And I think the bottom line was whichever one got Gruden, that coach was going to be gone. And the one that came in second in the Derby, and that was Tampa, was probably going to be okay with going forward with their guy.
Jonathan Gruden finally acknowledged the fact that he says he is a candidate for the Raiders job. He did that on Tuesday. Obviously, this is newsworthy, but this is a guy who hasn't coached in almost 10 years. Is this a good fit in Oakland?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that it's going to be a great fit. I know a lot of people have made this point, so I'll make the point as well. Yes, he won the Super Bowl in Tampa in his first year. He didn't win much after that, and he hasn't coached in 10 years, so he hasn't really won a playoff game. I think it's something like 15 years, if you will. So, listen, I understand that he's a name. I understand that there's talk of potentially getting him a slice of ownership and all this. And obviously there's going to be very many stories written about John Gruden's return to Oakland. All that said, none of this guarantees that Oakland is going to be any good, that he's going to fix Derek Carr. Just because he has a very nice television show that has him working with a lot of these young quarterbacks does not necessarily mean that he's going to go and whisper Derek Carr into an MVP season.
All right, let's run through the current job openings. As we said, as of Tuesday, 6 of them on the docket. And let's see who you guys think is the best fit for each opening right now. Jonathan, let's start with you. The opening in Detroit with the Lions, who is the best fit there?
Obviously they're going to interview Terrell Austin. He could be a great fit. It just seems like, and this is not anything new or innovative, but everyone's sending Matt Patricia to Detroit. It makes so much sense. It'd have to be the Pats defensive coordinator, Matt Patricia.
I'm with you, Jonathan. I think it's also Matt Patricia for a couple of reasons. One, they've got a very good offensive staff with Jim Bob Cooter and Brian Callahan leading the way. And those are guys that Matt Stafford's very comfortable with. So it makes sense for them to keep the offensive staff in place. They do need to fix the running game, but the comfort level of the quarterback, I think, is really, really important there. And two, of course, there's the alignment of the organization. We've seen where misaligned organizations have failed over the last few years. And whether it works or not, we'll see. But at the very least, when you bring in Matt Patricia, you've got somebody who speaks the same language as the general manager, Bob Quinn, and understands the way Bob Quinn's going to go about building a team. And you align things, and I think that's very, very important.
All right, in New York, Ben McAdoo didn't last the season. Who's the best fit for the Giants' new position?
Well, I think both the Patriots guys are going to get a strong look. Obviously, Jim Schwartz's name's been out there. I'm going to give you one that's a little bit off the board. I like David Shaw, the head coach at Stanford. Now, it's been impossible to get him out of there. NFL teams have inquired. I mean, he is paid well there. He is an alum. He's from the area. He's very, very comfortable there. And he can win 9-10 games a year there. And they're going to build a statue outside the stadium of him for it, And so it'd be difficult for anyone to get David Shaw out of there. But here's the thing about the Giants. They're not an organization that's going to fit to their coach. The coach is going to have to fit to them. And I think a lot of who the Giants have been over the years, what they've been over the years, fits well and lines up well with who David Shaw is.
Jonathan, what do you think? Bert giving us a wild card pick on wild card weekend with the Giants. Who do you like in New York?
That is a wild card. I love the fit there. I think what Bert's saying, everything he's saying is right. But he also made mention it's been impossible to get David Shaw out of Stanford. I don't know many people like David Shaw, everything that I've read or seen about him. I don't know him personally. But wanting to go over and take over the New York Giants franchise and deal with the New York media and what you're going to do with Odell Beckham and an aging Eli Manning, I don't know if those are the problems that a mild-mannered cat like David Shaw would necessarily want. Then again, like I said, I don't know David Shaw. It would seem Jim Schwartz is a guy that's been linked there. You mentioned him earlier, Bert, that this is going to be his second time around. Obviously a defensive guy. Dave Gettleman was just working with a defensive guy here in Carolina. in Ron Rivera. It seems like that is going to be a marriage that could work out really well in New York.
All right, Jonathan, Chuck Pagano out in Indianapolis. Who's the next head coach for the Colts?
Well, let's just go ahead and forget about Harbaugh, right?
That would have been your wild card, Jonathan. Come on.
Let's go ahead and forget about Harbaugh. I'm going to forget about David Shaw because, Bird has already thrown him out there in New York. So I guess he's going to New York. If I have to find somebody, it certainly seems like a Josh McDaniels here, where when you're McDaniels and you're going to pick the place with the quarterback, you're not going to guess on who the quarterback's going to be. And of all the openings, there is no better quarterback on one of these open head coaching vacancies teams than Andrew Luck with the Indianapolis Colts. Josh McDaniels can go there, and he can mold Andrew Luck after this year of him being off. Obviously, he's a mobile guy, certainly more mobile than a quarterback that he's been dealing with in New England. I would really look forward to seeing what the Colts can do with a healthy Andrew Luck on a year's rest with Josh McDaniels.
Job opening in Arizona with the Cardinals. Jonathan, Bruce Arians announces his retirement. Who's the best fit out in the desert?
I'll give you two names, and I think that one is probably going to be one that Albert mentions, but obviously Mike Vrabel, the very hot coaching candidate there in Houston and former NFL player. And I like Steve Wilks, the Carolina defensive coordinator who has been the associate head coach in Carolina for a number of years. When you look at this Cardinals defense, they have such talent there. And then if you look especially in the defensive backfield, if you can get a head coach like Steve Wilks who really knows what's going on back there where their stars really are there, especially their young stars, right? And so I'm going to give you two names rather than one. It's either going to be Mike Vrabel or Steve Wilks.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Vrabel here. I know why Jonathan thinks that I'm going with Vrabel because he's a Buckeye. It's not just that. I think Mike's a bright young coach. And look, this is the most of all these openings. This is the opposite of the Oakland situation. Yeah. This is a wide open search. They are not going in with any preconceived notion about who they're going to hire. And so I think that Vrabel is a guy who could come in and be a program leader. And you're going to have to fill out his staff with good assistants. That's part of it. And obviously you're going to need an offensive assistant, presumably to develop a young quarterback that you're going to draft in the next year or two to be Carson Palmer's successor. But I just think when you look at what they've been under Bruce Arians, what they are under Steve Keim, the general manager, I think Mike Vrabel really fits that. And so a lot of it will come down to his ability to convince them that I could fill out the staff the right way, but I think Vrabel fits there.
All right, last opening as of Tuesday available is the Bears in Chicago. John Fox is out. Bert, who fits in Chicago?
I'm going to give you two names that I think are likely to be in the mix at the end that are already set up to interview there. And both are guys who can work with young quarterbacks. One's Pat Shurmur, who has previous experience in Cleveland, has done a great job with the quarterbacks in Minnesota over the last 2 years, working with Sam Bradford last year. And then this year, making that offense confident enough that they could believe they could win on a week-to-week basis without, in the early part of the season, knowing who their quarterback was and then getting behind Case Keenum as the season wore on. He's done a great job there. I think people are a little more willing to overlook what happened in Cleveland based on the Browns franchise and where it's been since he was there. And so he's one name. And then if you want a young name and a guy who some people think could wind up being this year's Sean McVay is John DeFilippo, who's done a great job developing Carson Wentz there in Philadelphia and somebody who could match up with Mitch Trubisky pretty well.
Jonathan, who do you like in Chicago?
Yeah, I like John DeFilippo, but I'll actually have him going to Tennessee. If they get blown out, I know that job is not open yet, but it may very well be that. The name that I have in Chicago is Pat Shurmur for every reason that Albert just mentioned, as well as the fact that, he knows this NFC North. And Mitch Trubisky, a fellow Tar Heel, seems to be the real deal. This is a guy in Shurmur who figured it out with Case Keenum, who figured it out with Sam Bradford, figured it out with Teddy Bridgewater. What a real embarrassment of riches the Vikings have. That's another aside for another time, but that they figured out this quarterback situation 3 times when half the NFL teams can't figure it out 1 time is very impressive. I got Shurmur in Minnesota.
Wait, you mentioned a possible opening in Tennessee for a playoff team. We're actually going to get to that in a couple minutes. So let's get to Wild Card Weekend, guys. It is upon us. In the NFC, the Saints and Panthers going to go at it for a 3rd time this season. Albert, New Orleans has had their way with Carolina twice this season, double-digit wins in both of those games. Should we expect anything different this weekend?
I think the key is going to be, and we're going to get to this a little bit more in last call, is the running game of New Orleans. And what's so unique about the Saints team, why I think the Saints could be a favorite to go to the Super Bowl, that combination of run game and defense is something Drew Brees hasn't had in his 12 years in New Orleans. And so he can legitimately throw for 150 yards in a game, and they have a chance to win because they can pull different levers to win. And what's really, really interesting about this is the Carolina front has shut down everybody in the running game except New Orleans. And New Orleans has gone for 150 yards in them twice. And so that, to me, is going to be such an interesting subplot here. What do Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara do against the Carolina defense? I think that could tell a tale.
Jonathan, you're down in North Carolina. How are the Panthers prepping for this game? And has there been any distraction from the sale of the team and what's been going on surrounding the franchise as they get ready for a playoff game?
I don't sense any distraction here. Obviously it's a gigantic deal. No doubt, with the explosive SS story last month. But I don't really sense much of a distraction in this team. They're in the playoffs. These guys are paid to perform. They all want a ring. And so the distraction's not really a thing here in Charlotte. To Albert's points about the New Orleans running game, absolutely. I've watched both of those games very closely between the Saints and the Panthers. The Saints were clearly the better team in both matches. They're the better team top to bottom. You have a defense that all it has to do is be competent. They've been so bad for the previous 4 years. All it has to do is be competent. Well, you do have a competent defense, a middle-of-the-road defense. That's fine with what you have on offense. And it's not one of these fluky, opportunistic defenses either, where all of a sudden the free safety's getting 7 interceptions based off some overthrows. You have a Marshawn Lattimore, who, in my opinion, is Defensive Rookie of the Year. You have Cameron Jordan, who should be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. I do like this defense, even though it's not a championship caliber defense. The New Orleans Saints, when you have Drew Brees, when you have Alvin Kamara, when you have Mark Ingram, you don't need a championship caliber defense. You just need a defense that can hold its own. That's what they have. I like New Orleans in this game.
All right, the other game in the NFC, the Rams host the Falcons Saturday night. Rookie coach Sean McVay makes his playoff debut against the defending NFC champs. Might be gaining a little steam after their win in Week 17. Jonathan, do you think playoff experience is going to play a role at all in this one for the Rams and McVay?
I absolutely think so. When you look at this Rams team, they are not very experienced when it comes to the playoffs. Obviously, Sean McVay is not very experienced when it comes to the playoffs, coaching in his first ever playoff game as a head coach. And then you have Atlanta, who looked really good against Carolina. I know they kicked a bunch of field goals. Carolina's defense finally stood up there once Atlanta started threatening in the red zone. But Atlanta they treated Sunday's game against Carolina like a playoff game, and they played like the Atlanta Falcons playoff team that I saw a lot last season. And so when you consider the experience that they have, that they very well remember 28-3, when you consider that they have already been playing in the playoffs because they had to win on Sunday, whereas the LA Rams with zero playoff experience rested nearly everybody there in Week 17, I like Atlanta in this one.
All right, Albert, in the AFC, Chiefs host the Titans. Tennessee head coach Mike Mularkey, for now, has saved his job by getting the Titans to the playoffs. If the Titans don't make a long run here, though, could Mularkey be gone in Tennessee?
I think he's okay. I think one thing that people probably don't recognize now is that there is a strong relationship between Mike Mularkey and the general manager, John Robinson. Doesn't mean that they weren't thinking about it, because they absolutely were. And if they had lost last week, I think there was absolutely a chance that he was going to be gone and that John Robinson would be out pursuing expatriate assistants like Josh McDaniels or maybe Bill O'Brien. The bottom line is they did get to the playoffs. They've put themselves in a position now where they can build off of this year. Marcus Mariota wasn't great, so there's definitely that acknowledgement internally that his development needs to be kicked into another gear in 2018. But I think the relationship there between coach and general manager is a lot better than people realize. I think the fact that they got to the playoffs probably saves Mularkey's job.
Jonathan, you hinted earlier that you think there's going to be an opening in Tennessee despite the playoff appearance here. Explain that.
Well, I think if they get blown out by the Kansas City Chiefs, like I expect them to get blown out in Arrowhead this weekend, if they get embarrassed, listen, they very well could have not been in the playoffs. And as Albert mentioned, maybe it was a little bit more than just a thread that Mike Mularkey has hung on or will hang on. But if you get embarrassed in the playoffs by the Kansas City Chiefs and Marcus Mariota looks as bad as he's looked all season, and he has not looked good at all with 13 touchdowns to 15 interceptions and an adjusted yards per attempt at 6.1, I think that there's a possibility that this Titans franchise says, hey, it's still early yet. Maybe one of their top guys is still out there that they can go after. And that's just my feeling on it. If you get embarrassed on national television your first time in the playoffs in some time.
John, how about Kansas City? You sound like you like them against Tennessee. Alex Smith has gotten this team to the playoffs. It's been kind of a schizophrenic season for the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes, he's on display in Week 17. Do you think the playoffs are going to determine the future quarterback situation in Kansas City?
I think that Alex Smith played so well. Let's not forget that for the first half of the season, we were talking to Alex Smith as an MVP. And now, they got it together there at the end of the season. We're able to get into the playoffs, winning a very down AFC West. I think that they're going to blow out, like I mentioned earlier, Tennessee. Then they're going to have a tough test in the divisional round, of course. But I feel like Alex Smith has done enough to lock up his job to at least start next season. Listen, I understand Patrick Mahomes is a very exciting guy. I understand that Alex Smith is closer to the end of his career than the beginning of his career. Alex Smith still has plenty left in the tank. He's played plenty well the past 2 seasons. And while you do have a talented rookie in Patrick Mahomes that you spent a lot of draft capital to get in terms of a first-round pick, it's okay when look at the New England Patriots. And, of course, this is a big-time example because they're Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. But they held on to a guy in Jimmy Garoppolo when you knew that Tom Brady could get the job done and ended up trading him away for a second-rounder later on, basically in the last minute that they could. Well, why can't you just let Patrick Mahomes sit on the bench for another season if Alex Smith shows you that he can win you 11 or 12 games a year? That's what I don't necessarily understand about this. I understand Mahomes could be very good. Alex Smith's done enough to earn his job next season.
And I agree that he's done enough to earn his job. The one thing that I think could be that I think is the deciding factor is where they think Mahomes is internally in his development. Remember, Smith only has 1 year left on his contract, so if they want to get something for that asset, that they have to do it now. Like, they have to do it after this year. And so that's part of the decision-making process too, is if you want to turn Alex Smith potentially into a draft pick, then you have to do it right now.
All right. Let's talk about one more quarterback that has a lot on the line in the playoffs. That's Tyrod Taylor.
Yep.
Bills take on the Jaguars. Bert, Taylor gets benched midseason, and he comes back. He gets this team to the playoffs. Has he shifted the support back in his favor?
No, I think that they still view him the same way. I mean, I think that this is a guy who they view as a stopgap player who's not worth the money that he's going to be owed next year, and that's why I think he'll probably be somewhere else. We can argue whether it's fair or not. The bottom line is that the previous regime led by Doug Whaley made a determination on him, wanted to move on from him the last offseason. That's why they kicked the tires into Deshaun Watson, Mahomes, Trubisky, all of those guys. And the coaching staff wanted to see it for themselves. The genesis of the benching before the Charger game was the team had come to that determination that the previous regime was right, and that they felt like there's limitations on this player. We want to see the rookie now. Obviously, it blew up in their face. And Tyrod's come back in and played well, but the limitations are still there. And so I don't think Tyrod's the future at the position. I think they would take him back for less money than he's owed. But why would Tyrod do that now?
Right,
I think this is headed for a divorce in all likelihood.
Jonathan, this is a guy who came back, got his job, and has not played all that well. He's completed less than 60% of his passes since regaining the starting position. Has he shown you anything that leads you to believe that the Bills can pull off an upset over the Jaguars?
It's so difficult when it seems like everybody who's above you doesn't really believe in you. And when you know that you are far and away better than Nathan Peterman, but then they still decide to bench you for Nathan Peterman, I believe that has to do something to your psyche. Listen, I completely agree. This guy is not the all-star franchise quarterback. He's not a top-5 quarterback. There's no doubt at all about it. I do think it's very odd, and Bert alluded to it, fair or unfair, and we can go back and forth on it, and all that's fine and well. I do think it's odd, though, that he has been the quarterback of some relative success for Buffalo when you look at the past 2 decades, and without any memorable quarterbacks, and that he's just not really appreciated, it seems, by those in charge in Buffalo. I understand if they want to move on from him at the end of the season, but clearly he was the best quarterback on the roster before that Chargers game, and then they found that out when it did blow up in their face. The one thing that Tyrod Taylor, really any quarterback on the Buffalo Bills, has to have is a healthy Shady McCoy, and I was very disappointed to see him go down with that injury. He may still play this weekend, but of course he's not going to be 100%, and I don't know how this Buffalo team, without Shady McCoy, one of the best running backs in the NFL, can get the job done against that Jaguars defense.
Yeah, and so a lot of Tyrod's success has been kind of ebbed and flowed with the success of the running game, taking Shady McCoy out of the equation. absolutely doesn't help matters.
JD, a big question, some answers. We'll start to get them this weekend. A lot to look forward to. Guys, I think the notebook is officially empty. Albert Breer, Jonathan Jones, thanks for being with us, guys. All right, time now for Scot's Spotlight as we welcome in former NFL General Manager and Executive Scot McCloughan. And Scott, let's start in Green Bay, a place where you worked in the 90s. The Packers announced that Ted Thompson is transitioning from his GM post to an advisory role with the team. You know Thompson very well, Scott. You worked together in Green Bay and in Seattle. What do you think this move means for the Packers going forward?
You know what? He's a phenomenal personnel guy. First of all, let me say this. He's a better person. He is a personnel guy, but he's an excellent personnel guy. We've been friends for 20-plus years. I think the situation was a time for them to make their move and for him to make his move. And he's still going to be involved, and the organization is still strong. Of course, you got the quarterback that's in situation sets itself up for success. But he's been around a long time. He played a long time for the Oilers. He's been a personnel guy, front office guy for a long time. And he can walk out on his own accord if he wants to. But I know he wants to be involved. I know they want him involved. And that organization goes stronger and stronger because of the quarterback and if they draft well. Now if they bring someone new in as a personnel guy, it could change a little bit. But still, that organization, like I said, I worked there 5 years, and it's strong, very strong.
All right, so Scott, there have been some internal candidates mentioned, and one guy, Russ Ball, is on the cap side. You've got a couple of the top scouts there, Brian Gutekunst, Elliott Wolf. How big a decision is that part of it, deciding do we want a cap guy or do we want a scout to be our general manager, and how can that affect things going forward?
Yeah, personally, I go personnel guy, and Murphy's going to do what he wants to do. I have no problem with Russ Ball. He's really good at what he does. But when it's all said and done, when the day's over and you're having drafts, you're having free agency, personally, I'm taking the personnel guy that's going to be there and understand what it's supposed to look like and how it does look like. And I think that's very important. And again, I'm not knocking salary cap guys. I'm not knocking, presidents whatsoever. But it's so important to have the personnel guy in hand.
Scott, let's talk about the playoffs here. Wild card weekend, looking at the 4 games. From an X's and O's standpoint, which matchup are you most excited about?
Very excited about the Falcons going to the Rams. Very excited. It's tough for the Falcons flying cross country, and the Rams have been playing well, but it's 2 high-powered offenses. And it's going to be an excellent game. It's, this is what you live for. This is why you're a general manager. This is why you're a personnel executive, whatever, area scout. You live to be in the playoffs because it's so dynamic and it's so exciting. But it's going to be a heck of a game. And, I'm very interested to see, Sean being the first-year head coach. You got a second-year quarterback in Goff that's had a great year. Now you're bringing the MVP from Atlanta flying across country. It's going to be a good ball.
What are you most looking forward to that game, Scott, when it comes to Atlanta, L.A.? And when it comes to Atlanta specifically, have they shown you enough at this point that they may be getting closer to the team that made a Super Bowl run a year ago?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And the thing about it is they've been there and done it, and with Sean, I love him to death, and with Goff, they haven't been there and done it. These guys have been in big-time playoff games, at home or on the road, been in the Super Bowl, so it's a lot of that plays into it. Because I remember I was in Green Bay, we would play the Cowboys every year in the playoffs, and they'd beat us because they've been there and done it. And we hadn't been there and done it yet. And then we finally got there. But it's the same thing. Matt Ryan's not worried about going to L.A. and playing in front of those fans. Julio Jones isn't scared about it. Goff's thinking about it. Wow. Gurley's thinking about it. We haven't been here. It's going to be interesting. I'll be very, very curious to see how the Rams show up and play.
Okay, and you obviously worked with Sean in Washington there. We always talk this time of the year about teams that have experience. The Falcons have it. They were in the Super Bowl last year going to L.A. And you have the Rams there with a second-year quarterback and a first-year head coach. Having been around Sean, how do you think he's going to handle all of it, being in that spot, being the guy pulling the trigger for the first time in a playoff setting?
You know what? I think he'll do a good job. I went out for the first game to see Frank Gore play. And the regular season game in L.A., the Colts were out there. And I talked to him, and he was calm as all get out. And that's his first regular season game ever as a head coach. I think he'll do a good job. he's into it. He's going to be prepared over the top. It's just the players have to go out and produce. They're going to be ready to go. I guarantee it. But they're playing a really good team, like you said, a Super Bowl team from last year, and you got the MVP from last year coming out there. So, but that's what's so cool about the playoffs is this is what you want. This is what you look forward to. This is why you work all those hours, and draft these players and sign these players, and coaches pound and pound and pound, watching tape and doing, schemes for games and all that. This is what you live for. And that's what's beautiful about it. It's like, for me, every time I went to playoffs, it's like Christmas. I would wake up in the morning, I'd be so excited, it's not even funny. And you never know what's going to happen. And it's good versus good. It's tough versus tough. And that's what, as a football person, that's what you want.
I'm feeling your excitement coming through the Skype screen, Scott. Let's finish up with a look at this week's Symetra Rising Star. Scott, which players should we keep an eye on individually during this weekend's wildcard games?
I'm saying Derrick Henry, Tennessee. He's a big back. He's had a good second half of the season. But I think, nowadays when you get to this time of the year, unless you're playing in a dome, it's different. But you're playing in cold weather, and you got to be able to run the ball. You have to be able to run the ball, and the big backs survive. And the more carries you get, second, third, fourth quarter, you're coming downhill. Change, just move the chains and score some points. But I think Derrick Henry.
How do you think that Tennessee running game matches up with Kansas City at Arrowhead in the cold weather climate? Obviously, the running is going to be important. Does Henry and company, are they successful this weekend against the Chiefs?
I think so. It's Arrowhead, and this time of year you have no idea what the weather's going to be like. It could be snowing, it could be raining, it could be blowing, whatever. But the one thing you have to, and I always thought about this when I drafted players, especially running backs and offensive linemen, who's going to succeed in, late in the season? Who's going to be the ones that, because you have to be able to run the ball. Because if it's snowing or raining or whatever, you're not going to be able to throw the ball much. You got to be able to move the chains. And I think Derrick Henry, he's ideal because he's a between the tackles type guy. He's a one-cut guy. He's downhill. And that's what he does. And he's still young, and he's had some success. But I think guys like that, this time of the year with the weather, if you're playing inside, it's different, of course. But those guys are important, very important.
Interesting. You mentioned the weather. Only 1 out of 4 games are going to have cold weather. You got a game in L.A., you got a game in Jacksonville, and, of course, in the Dome in New Orleans. Kansas City expected to be frigid, though. Scott, love the excitement. A lot to be excited for. 4 ball games this weekend. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you guys very much.
I'm Albert Breer. This is Last Call. December 2nd was an important day in Green Bay. It was Aaron Rodgers' 34th birthday. And in case you're unfamiliar with how quarterbacks age, that puts him around the 12th tee of his NFL life. It's how old Peyton Manning was during the last season he played in Indianapolis. It's how old Tom Brady was when he was helping a young tight end named Rob Gronkowski break through as a pro. And it's also how old Brett Favre was at the start of the 2004 season. It was the following spring, of course, when the Packers drafted Favre's eventual successor with the 24th overall pick. All that indicates that Rodgers should have at least a good few years left at the top of the pro football heap at his position. But it's also a reminder that nothing is forever. And so it is that the Packers now face their most critical offseason since 2008, when they scuffled through the messy transition from Favre to Rodgers. This time around, they'll be looking for a new general manager, a decision that will reverberate and trickle down through every corner of Lambeau Field. Remember, the Packers have had just 3 guys in that role over the last 27 seasons. So first, they'll have to find that guy. Do they go with the clubhouse leader, their cap manager, Russ Ball, at the risk of sending their top scouts scurrying for other jobs? Do they go with Brian Gutekunst or Elliott Wolf, homegrown evaluators who've interviewed for GM jobs elsewhere? Do they try and pry John Schneider away from Seattle, or do they go outside the organization completely? So that's step 1. And after that, there will be the contract situations of Rodgers himself and eventually Mike McCarthy. Both those guys are up after 2019. And then there's the hiring of a new defensive coordinator, which McCarthy will lead, and filling out any resulting holes in scouting, and you get the picture. For a team that's won a lot, that's a lot of uncertainty. So let's go back to that tumultuous summer of 2008. It was followed by a 6-10 season, which stood as the last non-playoff year until this one. By Rodgers' 3rd year as a starter, the Packers were Super Bowl champions. The next year, Green Bay was undefeated into December, and Rodgers won his first league MVP a month after his 28th birthday. Back then, the future seemed limitless. That season ended with an upset loss to the Giants in the divisional round, and the Packers haven't been to, let alone won, the Super Bowl in 7 seasons since. All of that hope has been replaced by pressure on everyone to make the most of what's left of Rodgers' prime. And at no point has the team faced more significant decisions than it does now. And we go over all that one more time. The team has to hire a GM, make decisions going forward on its coach, break the bank on its quarterback, and try to put the best team around him to maximize the generational talent that he brings to the table. And we all got to look this year, as we did in 2013, at what it looks like without him there. And that only highlights how much is on the line in Green Bay over the next few months.